Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny meeting. It's now 7 o'clock and I would like to start the meeting. I'm Councillor Muldowney. I'm the Vice Chair of this committee, but I'm going to be chairing the meeting as Councillor Rigby is delayed. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. I note the portfolio holder for education, Councillor Carter, is present tonight and the Chair has agreed to this prior to the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence. Rhiannon, have any apologies been received?
Yes, we have had apologies from the Church of England representative, the Youth Cabinet representative and the youth worker.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies that anybody knows of? Thank you. Item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting of the 12th of September 2023 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. Just that I'm not shown as in attendance once again.
Can that be amended, Rhiannon? Thank you. No, she put herself over there. Okay, if there are no other comments, the minutes are approved. Item 3, earlier Councillor Rigby agreed to one item of urgent business regarding the RAC issue. A briefing note was circulated to members in October on this issue. It was actually supposed to be an item on this agenda, but we moved it off because we had such a packed agenda. But things have moved on since then, and a couple of the items that were supposed to come have been moved to another meeting. So we are having it as an urgent item of business today. So I have a number of questions. As the portfolio holder is here tonight, perhaps, and the Assistant Director of Education is not, perhaps we should ask the portfolio holder. Yep.
Yeah, but I'll pass on to officers any technical questions I don't have the answers for to hand.
So, first of all, I'm wondering if there's any update on how the schools are progressing with the establishment of temporary accommodation. The briefing note that we received said that that was due to be organised by mid-November. I've heard this was being called as an urgent item today, so I've re-gone over the briefing note as well, just so it's fresh in my mind as well. There has been some issues with the sourcing of the temporary classrooms. I'll pass over to Sarah to provide the details of which.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there have been some changes in what was already proposed in the briefing note in terms of temporary classrooms. I think it's probably beneficial to do a full update in a report for either the next meeting or in a briefing note because of the changes that have been made. So, you know, I suppose what I would like to be clear about is that all children in the primary schools have remained in school. What they're looking at is a number of options. The Academy Trust is still working with the department on the mitigation plans. So where they were proposing to put temporary demountables in, they're now looking at the remedial works, bringing those forward so that it's less disruption for the children for learning. So that's the plan for the primary schools. Two of the schools have got marquees. One of them was already updated in the briefing note. That was for Thameside Primary, and that was for a breakfast club. And there is another marquee going in at Arthur Bugler Primary. And of course, if any members would like to visit those schools to have a look at them, they're very happy, I'm told, with the marquees. they're heated. I know there might be some concerns around, particularly as we're coming towards the winter, but the Academy Trusts are more than welcome to, they're happy to have members go and visit so that you can be satisfied that they are of the high standard. And the specification for those was put together by the DfE. In terms of St Clair's, they have got units on site at the moment. There's still some additional works required so that the students can access them because of where they're located in the school. But the plan is that they will be ready to be occupied from the 27th of November. That date might slightly change, but that's the plan. That's the latest update at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, obviously, I'm very concerned because we've got the marquee at Thameside where children are, I mean, the weather's been absolutely diabolical and it's getting a lot colder now. I mean, it's really not appropriate to be having children having to spend time in a marquee outside of the building. So can I just clarify what you said, Sarah, in terms of they're not going forward with the temporary accommodation now, they're going to try and bring forward the works that need to be done?
Yes, they're looking at
apart from in the case of St Clair's.
Yes, apart from in the case of St Clair's, they are looking at alternative options. What they don't want to do is keep disrupting children. So, because if you're moving them, but at the moment, all the children are being taught in classrooms where there's a marquee that's for the running of a breakfast club.
But there's still children present in that marquee.
There is, and that's a temporary measure whilst they work with the department on their mitigation plans for remedial action.
Okay, I mean, do you think that that's satisfactory, Councillor Carter, that we've got children being in a breakfast club, in a marquee, in this weather and moving into the winter months?
Obviously, the Thameside has had to look at alternative provisions to continue the provision of this breakfast club that they have set up. I will remind you that Thameside is an academy. It's not a school that we have control over. They think it's adequate, and I invite you to take up their offer to go and visit the school if you are worried about this marquee.
Have you visited the school, Councillor?
No,
Carter?
not Thameside, no.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that we don't have, we have only influence, that the academies are not under our control, but we still, all the accountability still rests with the local authority. Otherwise, why have an education portfolio holder at all? So, can I ask what you specifically have been doing to make sure that our children have got proper facilities, indoor facilities for them to be able to pursue their education, because their educational achievement and attainment, we are responsible for that as a local authority, and that falls under your portfolio.
Thurrock does not receive the improvement grant for, it is between the academies and the DfE. But, sorry, could you repeat the first bit of your question? I don't want to get the answer wrong, and I was more focusing on the end bit there. So I do apologise. Would you be able to repeat it?
I said, what specifically have you been doing to assure, within your portfolio, the whole of your portfolio is education? I think it's a bit of a cop-out saying that, we don't have much influence because they're all academies, but we still retain the accountability within the local authority for children's well-being and children's attainment in schools. So what specifically have you been doing to make sure that our children are being educated and being, housed in appropriate accommodation within the schools that are effective?
Well, as of in this month, all schools will be back to face-to-face learning. We have had long conversations with all our schools as a critical friend. I remember when it was first coming about, must have been annoying you guys with the amount of times I was on the phone with you. Again, the improvement grant sits with academies. We do not receive the improvement grant. Perhaps the officers can go into more detail here, as 54 out of 55 of our schools are academies. Academies work with the DfE on improvement to school buildings. That is not the council's responsibility.
Can I ask if you were concerned in any way about how, the education of the children in our borough, given the promised temporary accommodation has now been abandoned, and there doesn't seem to be another plan in place?
Oh, they have provided that the school has. Sorry, I pointed at my phone. The briefing note was up. That's why I was pointing at it. They have promised to make alternatives. There is a face-to-face learning for every single pupil as of this month. Of course, I'm concerned about education. I always will be. Like, Thurrock has had incredible success with primary education, and secondary is improving as well as of recent years, and we should be very proud of this. So in order to maintain the great work that's happened over the last couple of years, we should always be concerned about this. I did know Sheila had her hand up before. So.
I think the issue is that the DfE and the Academy Trust are satisfied, with the arrangements, and it is the marquee arrangement. I mean, it sounds quite alarming because if you have a marquee in your garden, it's very different, as I understand it, to the marquee that they've got in the school. I've not visited it either, but obviously there is an offer to go and visit it, and I think probably it's best that we get a formal briefing out, again, as we have been doing through this, and perhaps we could explain more fully what the marquee is, how it's heated, how it's used for the Breakfast Club, so that we can try and put people's minds at rest on that. If you go and visit and anyone thinks there's an issue with that, then of course, we can raise that both with the Trust and with the DfE. But ultimately, it is for the DfE and for the Trust, to be satisfied that, and parents at that school, presumably parents, their children at that school, if they felt that that was not okay, they too would be complaining about it. It's not meant to be a permanent arrangement, and I think what we do need to do is brief all members on, exactly what's happening now, because things do change and move on, and the academies, as Sarah's already said, are wanting to minimise disruption to children. So instead of bringing in temporary classrooms and then getting the remedial works and moving them into that, they've accommodated the children within the schools in order to get the remedial work done. So I think it'd be really helpful if we could have a full briefing that we can send out to all members, and certainly for this committee and other members, if you do want to go and visit, we can make sure that happens.
I think that's probably an invitation that many of us will want to take up. So can I ask what other provision has been provided for the schools to go back to face-to-face teaching? Just to come back on one point that you made, though, it's actually residents that have raised the issue of the children being in marquees with myself and other councillors, which was part of the reason why I called this as an urgent agenda item tonight. So what are the other accommodations that have been made so that we can assure ourselves that they are adequate as well?
I think, as I've said, in primaries, all the children are accommodated within the school, so they've utilised spaces that they already have. So no children in any of the primary schools are not in school. They're all having face-to-face learning. The only school that is doing a mixture of hybrid, sort of remote and face-to-face, is St Clair's for years 8, 9 and 10, but it is proposed from the 27th of November, around that time, that date might slip slightly, that all students at St Clair's will be back to face-to-face learning.
And that will be because the temporary accommodation is being provided there?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, they're more than happy for you to go and visit those units because they're, they're different to what we would know as normal temporary demountable classrooms. And they've also converted their sports hall. They're working really closely with the RSC's office around curriculum, making sure that all of the curriculum is being met as well, whilst they're having the mixture of learning for those students.
Okay, it's just like I remember the experience of remote learning during COVID was very patchy, and I am concerned that this is going to have an impact on children's attainment. And I'm surprised that the Education Portfolio holder hasn't actually been to visit some of these schools. But it's certainly an offer that I will take up. Thank you.
Yeah, could I just ask, when you talked about the hybrid mix, is it sort of like 2 days at home, 3 days on site, that kind of thing? Is that what you meant across the 3-year groups?
I'm not actually able to confirm the sort of full detail of how that's worked out, but it's you know, obviously they have those plans in place, they communicate with the parents, so they will do that for a term at a time, and then they'll communicate with parents before the next term, as they have been up until this point, whilst they look at, you know, working with the DfE to put other options in place. And of course, you know, unfortunately, St Clair's, you know, has, you know, it's a large school and it's difficult to manage. So they've, you know, they've worked really, really hard. The Trust have worked really hard. They have worked really hard on the communication with parents, keeping them informed of what's happening and, you know, progressing. They meet weekly with the Department for Education. So in the background, you know, they are continually working with them, as is Corringham actually, because, you know, they are also one of the schools, unfortunately, with RAC. The works there have already started, and I'm not sure. I'll come back to you on when those works are due to complete, because I don't have that information tonight. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Carter, for answering these questions. Even I believe you are not invited to be questioned on this item, but anyway, thank you for answering your question. Officers, can we arrange a visit for at least for committee members first, and then for the wider members, so to know like what actually is happening there, so it would give us an actual idea, like, you know, on all these things, rather than just discussing the presumptions. Thank you.
I'm more than happy to arrange that for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, when they're in these marquees for Breakfast Club, how long is Breakfast Club? Is it just breakfast or is it several hours?
It would just be for Breakfast Club. So I don't know how long they run that for in the morning. That's obviously organised by the school itself. But that's, you know, to allow disadvantaged children and any other children that want to go there for breakfast to be able to still continue to do that. So they're not there for a long period of time.
Thank you. I just wanted to know how long. I thought perhaps that would be the case. Thank you.
Yeah, and just if it can be minuted that as soon as possible for there to be another briefing note, and I think when we come to the work programming we'll want to put it back on the agenda for the next meeting, so we can keep an eye on developments. So item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to make?
No.
Okay. Item 5, Youth Cabinet update. Unfortunately, nobody from the Youth Cabinet will be attending the meeting tonight. The update report is in the papers for members and the public to read. We will therefore move on to the next item. Item 6, Children's Social Care Performance, Q1 2023-24. Can I ask Janet Simon to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this report is in relation to our data for children's social care performance in relation to Q1, April to June 2023. I don't propose to read out the whole report, and I'm hopeful that members have had an opportunity to read it. What I would say is that the service continues to monitor performance at a strategic and team level through monthly performance meets, development board, which is chaired by the DCS and attended by the portfolio holder, and attended by heads of service Managers and practitioners are held to account through team and service meetings and through supervision. So we look at that data on a daily basis, really. Performance is largely positive. For example, in terms of child and family assessments, 98% of those are done in time. In comparison, when comparing against statistical neighbours at 88.6, national at 84.5 and regional at 87.6. So that's pretty good performance in terms of the child and family assessments. There's been some improved performance for care leavers across the three measured areas: keeping in touch, accommodation, suitable accommodation, and education, employment and training. So in terms of in touch, 95% of our care leavers are in touch with their PAs, and that's in comparison to stat neighbours of 93 and England of 92. In terms of care leavers who are in education, employment and training, that's at 55%, which is in line with the England average, slightly below the stat neighbours, 57%. Of course, we would like more of our care leavers to be in employment, education and training, so I'm not saying that's acceptable, it's just about comparing against some of our neighbours. But we're always seeking to kind of improve that number and get as many young people into education as possible, or training or employment. In terms of suitable accommodation, 91% of our young people are in suitable accommodation, and that's above England's average of 88% and statistical neighbours of 89%. So in terms of some of the challenges we've had in the first quarter, our CLA numbers increased to 308 at the end of quarter one. That's 68 per 10,000. That's in line with stat neighbours and below the national 70 per 10,000. And some of that was in response to an increase in our unaccompanied asylum-seeking numbers. That number has gone down. I think today it's at 297. But our US numbers still remain quite high. In terms of local authority benchmarks against statistical neighbours and nationally, we're always looking at what's happening across the country. And whether or not, there are areas we need to improve on, what's high, what's low, sometimes high is good, sometimes low is good. So it's just trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our children. There's a number of data sets in there, such as missing, and there's some information around that in terms of breaking it down by ages of children. Stuff around return home interviews, we see good performance in quarter one of this year. There's been some challenges, I think, kind of going forward because we've had to recruit to some of those posts, but we're hopeful that we'll kind of continue with that good performance. So, thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I know we discussed this in the pre-brief, but just to say, can the statistical neighbour in the Eastern region or England average, whatever's relevant, be put back onto the graphs? I mean, we did used to do that. I'm not quite sure when that got dropped, but it's just much easier for members, I think, to be able to see the visual representation. I mean, it's there for some of them. I know that the detail is in the written portion, so it is actually within the report, but it's just incredibly helpful, I think, for members if we can have that visual representation. It allows us to really be able to absorb that data, and some weeks we're absorbing a lot of data, so I'd really welcome that if that can go back in. Thank you. The other point that I wanted to make was around the recommendation. We've gone back to the members review the areas of good practice and performance, so it kind of seems that we should only focus on that and ignore areas of concern. I mean, I'm sure we won't be doing that tonight, but can we have both of those things in there? It's not just about looking at the good practice, it's about looking at the whole performance in the round. But just on those two technical notes, thank you.
Sorry, can I just say, so there are two recommendations there. So the other one is around members providing appropriate challenge around areas for development or any areas of concern as well. So we have put that in there too.
Okay, fair enough. Any questions?
Yes.
Councillor Abad?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers. We understand this is very difficult. The children are involved, and I think looking at all these diagrams, it looks very positive. But I just need clarification. If you look at these national stats, they are from 2021 to 2022, but we are comparing them with 2023 to 2024. So, was there not national data available, or this is how we compare these stats?
So the returns are submitted around June of each year, so they haven't been published for 2022-23 yet, so we're often comparing with the previous year.
Councillor Panjala.
Thank you, Janet, for the detailed report. I would like to ask about page number 18. This one, MASH contacts. If we see that one, total 1,561 we have received. So 41% is resulted no further action required. I want to know that 41% no action required means, are we receiving like irrelevant contacts, or what is the case for having that 41%?
Okay, so we receive a number of contacts, but no further action. I think it's a little bit misleading. So no further action can mean a range of things. It can mean step down to early help. It can mean that the work goes off to universal services, or it can mean that there's been contact made via the MASH to have a conversation about what needs to happen and to signpost people. So a lot of the contacts are not no further action. No further action can mean a number of things.
So can I just add to that? I think what no further action as well as that usually means is no further action for the MASH into children's social care. It doesn't mean it's not, and we've talked about this and said we probably need to change those words, because I think it's shorthand for the MASH because it means no further action into social care, but actually it could, some of these might be probation reports that are literally logged, so they're no further action in terms of you need an assessment, but actually it is information that we need and that we use. So I think we're saying we're going to try and work on coming up with some other outcomes that might say, that it's information received and logged and, that sort of thing, because it does look quite worrying, because otherwise it can look like you've got loads of contacts that don't go anywhere and nobody's doing anything with them, and that's not actually the case. So I think it's for us to try and amend that.
Thank you for the clarification. I have one more question about this one. Page number 19 and 20, rate of referrals. Thurrock rate of referrals, like a 10,000 population graph showing like it's going high compared to neighboring and national statistics graph. So whether it is good or bad, just I want to know.
I mean, we review this every month when we look at our data and what we know. So this week we had a performance meeting and we look at the data across the year. We look at the previous year and the year before that. And what we know is that at certain times of the year, we will just get more referrals for different reasons. It's just not a static figure. It can rise, it can fall, it can be dependent on family, large families, small families. So it's not something we're concerned about.
I'll just add to that, sorry, Janet. Just to add to that, if you see it's going up in June, this is usually before school holidays, and what we tend to get is quite an increase in referrals from schools, especially before the summer break. And as Janet said, what we do is we look back several years and we go, so every June and at the beginning of July, we get an increase in referrals, particularly from schools, because they're not going to be there for 6 weeks. And it's a thing where schools want to make more referrals at that time of year. We also get a similar thing in December, mid to end of December, again before the schools are, and the same at Easter time. So I think as Janet says, it sort of evens out, but actually there are peaks and troughs. So if you look at August is usually quite low or lower, because we're not getting as many referrals, because schools and police are our highest referral agencies to us. So when the schools are on holidays, we see a dip. but we see a big increase usually before they're going on holidays.
Thank you for the clarification. I have one more thing. This one, just I would like to congratulate about children and families assessment completed in time scale. Like we have increased to 98% compared to previous year. So what is the advantages for getting this success? Just what is the reason behind this increasing success?
So as I think I've said, there's a large focus on making sure that we know what's going on for children and families. And the only way we can know that really is by making sure we're assessing and kind of repeating those assessments, because if for cases that are open, for example, for looked after children on a plan, those assessments are reviewed every 6 months. We need to make sure that we know what the changing picture is for children, and that information is looked at team meetings, in supervision. It's the only way we can work with families if we know what's going on for them. So if we're not doing those assessments, then we can't get a good sense of what's going on, and we can't make the right decisions with families to kind of have better outcomes for their children.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just on page 20 still, on 3.4, just looking at the, excuse me, the assessment. So between April and June 2023, compared to the previous year, there was a 9.7% drop. There was two parts to my question. Firstly, is that surprising, and is it a concern that there was 10% less? And secondly, I'm possibly reading too much into it. When it says completed, it doesn't mean that there was more incomplete. Does it just mean that there was less assessments coming through the system year on year?
So it can be a number of things. It can be less assessments coming in through the front door, and some of that you can see through the amount of referrals that are coming in. But also it can be about some of the assessments that are being reviewed. So you might have more assessments due in June, for example, and there's going to be peak times when people will do more assessments. It just so happens that you might get more assessments in 1 month than the other. It's not a cause for concern. It just so happens that sometimes there's more assessments to be reviewed in a month and more referrals.
Thank you. Just to echo what Councillor Panjala said about the completion of assessments within timescale, I mean, it really is an excellent performance, and I know that you're statistically, you know, that this happens year on year, that you're very good in that area. So well done to the whole team on that. My question was about the adoptions, and the adoption levels were very low compared to previous years. I mean, even the COVID years when there was not much movement. So I was just wondering, what are the factors? I know obviously you've had problems with the court systems being backlogged. Is that still an issue? And what is being done to improve that picture?
So there have been some problems in terms of court delays and things like if parents make appeals following the making of a placement order, then that can cause delays around adoption orders. But I think probably we'll see in Q2 and Q3 an increase, because there have been more. And I know today I was speaking with the ADM advisor for adoption. We've got a lot coming through in December. In terms of matches for children and children being placed for adoption. So we'll have children placed that we're just waiting to go through the court process in terms of finalising those orders. Yeah, there is some impact from COVID. That's kind of meant that some cases have kind of just not progressed as fast as we would like them to. But I think we'll start to see some improvements in terms of our numbers over the next few months. But what I would say is that we're a small authority. We don't have a lot of adoptions, so our numbers are fairly small. They're in the kind of, you know, under 20, you know, sort of like around 14 is kind of probably about right for Thurrock. And we're still early in the year. This is just really for the first quarter. So, you know, if we've got 5 in the first quarter, I would expect to see much more going forward.
Thank you.
And as the ADM, I see them coming through, so I know what's coming through the system.
Thank you.
I was just going to add to that if you look at our looked after children population, and you look at the under 5s in particular, you know, we do really rapid permanency planning for the under 5s don't stay in our care very long, they don't all get adopted. Some will go on to have special guardianship orders, for example, with family members. And some we do get successfully rehabilitated home if we can get the right support put in place for those children. But if you're looking at our figures, it's probably worth looking at that age group. We've got low numbers in that age group, and that they don't stay in our care, for years. Sometimes a young child might, if they're part of a sibling group and they've got older siblings, and the plan has been to keep the sibling group together. But generally speaking, for young children, sort of the under fives in particular, we've got a whole raft of permanency arrangements in place for those children.
Thank you. Councillor Abbas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers. Just on looked after children at 7.2, because our rate is 72% of children, they are placed within 20 miles. And, and then you have also mentioned this is the normal, we are above 16%, 28% is, which is higher than other neighbouring boroughs. So are we taking any measures to bring this down? Because I personally think 20 miles, looking at the geographics of our borough, is too much, 20 miles. So are we taking any measures to narrow this down or house locally these children?
So 20 miles is what we're measured on. Doesn't mean that it is 20 miles, it can be below 20 miles. But we are always looking to recruit foster carers in Thurrock, because we want children to be in placements that are close to home. Means they can go to the same schools, they can be part of their community. It's not always possible, but we do try our best to kind of keep children in Thurrock. And sometimes, unfortunately, we just can't, but we're looking at residentials in Thurrock. We've done some work around kind of making sure that some of our children can stay in residential properties in Thurrock, as well as with foster carers. So we are constantly trying to recruit, but unfortunately sometimes children do have to be placed outside.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. With the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, they come on their own. What's the youngest of ages that have come through? I know it might be awkward for you to answer that straight away. Is it 10 upwards, or is it low? Could it be lower?
They tend to be aged around 16 or 17. We occasionally have younger ones, but the youngest is I think we might have one that's at 14, but that is very rare. So they're usually males. So we might have one or two females, but they're usually male. They're usually around 16, 17. I think we have had one under 15, but that is rare. They are usually over 15.
Just on that point, and I appreciate you may not have this information at your fingertips. I mean, what kinds of circumstances would, just thinking as a parent, the idea of even my 17-year-old putting my 17-year-old on, I don't know, a boat or something, probably a perilous journey to get to another country as a child, even 16 or 17 years old, what kind of circumstances actually propel children to become what we class as unaccompanied asylum seekers? Because these are children at the end of the day, and it's hard to imagine being in that situation to have to do that with my own child, certainly.
I mean, the stories we hear, so what young people are reporting is that they're fleeing violence. There's been violence against their parents, against their families, or they don't know where their families are, so I don't know, maybe they've disappeared. Usually they're fleeing some sort of violence and they're in fear for their own safety, and I think their parents are sometimes kind of, if they're having to make a choice, they're making a choice to protect their child. That's the impression I get from what young people are saying, is that it's a very difficult journey, they're not taking it lightly. And sometimes you see young people when they first come in and they might look a little bit older, and then when they settle and they're able to kind of be a bit more relaxed, you realise they look younger than you initially thought. So they have experienced real trauma, a lot of these young people.
Thank you. I just think it's good for us to have an insight into, you know, what the stories are of these children that are arriving, because sometimes people aren't always kind about this group of what are children at the end of the day. So thank you very much for sort of explaining that from your experience. Are there any other questions? Thank you. So I'll move to the recommendations, and sorry, I was looking at this and the other recommendations on the other page, but the recommendations 1.1, that members review the areas of good practice and performance in children's social care and work undertaken to date to manage demand for statutory social care services, and 1.2, that members provide appropriate challenges around areas for development or any areas of concern. Are we agreed?
Yep, agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Item 7, update on Stable Homes Built on Love, the Government Implementation Strategy and Consultation on Children's Social Care Reform 2023. Can I ask Janet again to introduce this item, please? I think you need... Yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, so this is the implementation strategy launched in February 2023. I mean, it was the government's response to 3 reviews in 2022. So the first one was a child safeguarding review into the murders of Star Hobson and Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Competition and Markets review of homes for children in care in March 2022, and the independent review of children's social care. These reviews place the spotlight on children's social care, and in this report I've summarised some of the actions that have taken place so far. The strategy set out 6 pillars to transform children's social care, so around family help, multi-agency child protection, unlocking the potential of family networks, putting love, relationships and a stable home at the heart of children being in care, a valued, supported and highly skilled social worker for every child who needs one, and a system that continuously learns and improves and makes better use of evidence and data. The report sets out some of the actions so far. This is a 4-year strategy. And in the report, in the independent review of children's social care, there was a recommendation of 2.6 billion of new spending over the 4 years, 46 million in the first year, and then kind of going on from there up to the 2.6 billion. So it looks at an evaluation of the multi-agency arrangements, a 10 million investment to test new initiatives to reduce delays in public law cases, a joint children's social care and special educational needs roundtable convened with sector experts on disability. So there's a whole range of things that have been done so far in response. There's a little bit around family network, the FFC, Family First for Children Pathfinders. And 3 local authorities have been identified as pilots and pathfinders for that, and that's Dorset, Lincolnshire and Wolverhampton. Unfortunately, Thurrock were unable to kind of put in a bid for that because one of the requirements was that the local authority should not be subject to a 114 notice or spending controls on the last day of the application windows. As part of the strategy, the government has also pledged to deliver a fostering recruitment and retention programme so that foster carers are available for more children who need it, and they're investing 27 million over the next 2 years. They're looking at running 2 regional pathfinders to test creation of an end-to-end improvement. And Thurrock has kind of put in a bid with the Eastern region, but we haven't got the responses to that yet, but we're hopeful that we'll be part of one of the pathfinders for that. In addition to that, the strategy has recognised that young people leaving care need sufficient funds, So they've increased the care leavers allowance from £2,000 to £3,000, and the apprenticeship bursary increased from £1,000 to £3,000 to give better opportunities for care leavers. And one of the other things is that, you know, they asked for foster carers allowances to go up as well, and set out some figures in terms of that, and we've reviewed our foster carers rates and made sure that we've addressed that. Of course, all these things cost money, so it's not as simple as it's not like we've been given additional money, as in this is for foster carers, this is for care leavers. So we're having to do it out of the funds that are given to us, the Children's Social Care Funds. In terms of children's social care in Thurrock, we think we're quite well placed in terms of our ability to kind of meet some of the requirements that's been kind of set out in terms of thinking of how we're delivering services at the moment. We're really clear that we have got a think family approach, so we're doing family network meetings, we're trying to work with families to be part of solutions for change. We have been part of the family hubs, and we've kind of opened some hubs. We've opened the 8 hubs, and there was openings earlier this month, I think. Councillor Muldowney, you attended some of those. So we think we're in quite a good position. We're looking at our social work recruitment. We're trying to grow our own, you know, recruiting newly qualified social workers and nurturing them so that they'll want to stay in Thurrock, and trying to find different ways to do things. We may not be part of some of these pathfinders, but we're trying to think about, well, what can we do to be on the journey that's set out? You know, the amount of money that's been proposed as investment, if that's done, that would be great. And we're hopeful that we can be part of that journey.
Thank you, Janet. Any questions? Councillor Hartstein.
Thank you. Just in terms of obviously recruitment and retention, I know that's obviously a massive issue. Just page 36, 2.2. It was just the idea of a valued and supported and highly skilled social worker for every child who needs one. Obviously, I'm not expecting you to have the numbers at your fingertips, but in terms of caseloads, how would we compare with our statistical neighbours in terms of size of caseloads for social workers?
Caseloads are really important to us. We know that if the caseloads are too high, then social workers can't focus on what they need to. They can't build relationships. They can't develop, you know, those relationships and have those conversations, and we can't have good outcomes for children. Our caseloads, we think, are manageable. When we compare them, you know, we have social workers that join us from other local authorities, and they talk about the caseloads they have. Within the region, we compare caseloads, and we're comparable. They're different for different teams, but they are good caseloads. And when we had the Ofsted inspection back in 2019, they said that they felt our caseloads were appropriate, and they have remained largely the same. So despite everything else that's going on, we've made sure that caseloads, spans of control, so in terms of managers, managing social workers, that those have stayed manageable, so that they can have meaningful conversations, they can have time to reflect on the work they're doing, and they can build relationships. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Just add to that. One of the things that's sometimes a bit frustrating about social work is that there's not a national standard for caseloads. So whilst we're prescribed loads of things like how quickly, how often we have to visit, you know, timescales for assessments, timescales for visiting a child, for moving something on, what has not happened nationally is any agreement about what a good caseload looks like. And I suppose that'd be very difficult either for the DFE to do that or for Ofsted to come out and say what they... So what you'll see in reports is they say they think caseloads are manageable. Very rarely will they give a number or say what is reasonable. So that is left to local authorities. So we do some local conversations about, you know, what caseloads are like elsewhere, but you won't find any data on this nationally, but we have a fairly good idea about what we would say, and social workers do as well. And as Janet said, you know, if social workers move around different local authorities, they know when caseloads. So certainly, if in your child protection teams, if you're looking at caseloads 20 and above, you know that that's getting too much, and there isn't enough space for social workers to do the work that they need to do. And in our court teams, if you're holding court cases, usually caseloads are a little bit lower because they're more complex usually. And for some of our young people who are, you know, experiencing exploitation or they're missing and they're running away, we'll quite often take account for a social worker if you've got a particularly, it might on paper not look like a very heavy case, but we know that that social worker's having to travel long distances to go and find that young person. So we know that that caseload needs to be adjusted. So team managers have the opportunity to sort of lower and higher cases, but never to go higher than a particular level. So it's not an exact science, but you can get a feel for when you know those caseloads are not okay.
Sorry, thank you. Just and sort of slightly following up from that, in terms of social workers that leave to move on, is there any trends in terms of reasoning why they leave or move on? Anything you've noticed at all?
So there are a number of reasons that social workers move on. What we do for all of us, not just for social workers, but we do for social workers, is exit interviews. We always do exit interviews. Doesn't matter whether they're permanent or agency, because we want to kind of learn from what they're saying in terms of what we can do differently. And so what we are hearing from social workers is that sometimes they're leaving to work closer to home. Sometimes they want different opportunities, so there's something else that's coming up elsewhere. Sometimes people are leaving to go agency because they need to earn more money, especially in the current climate. What we're not hearing is we do look at the trends and we look at what people are saying. So people are not saying they're leaving because of caseloads, because of support within the local authority. Most people say they would return. So we're not really, I mean, if there was anything that a couple of people might say is that there's a lot of scrutiny and a lot of panels. And there are a lot of panels and there are a lot of scrutiny because we want to make sure that the decisions we make are right. But I wouldn't say they're more than other local authorities, if I'm honest. And we constantly review that to make sure they're right. But it's for a number of reasons. But by and large, it's not because people say it's a terrible place to work or I'm not getting the support I need or it's too many cases.
Lovely, thank you. It's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I just want to ask a question about, so obviously part of the one of the reviews that happened was the Competition and Markets Authority review of the provision of homes for children coming into care. And that showed that there were, well, I mean, we've had it in the specialist press, certainly, talking about the billions of pounds that private companies are making out of our most vulnerable children in the UK. So is there anything within this, I couldn't see when I read through, but maybe I've missed something. Is there anything in the reforms that's going to address this crisis that we've got with placements, or is that not really part of... Has it not been addressed? Because I couldn't see that it had, from what I'd read.
So I think largely it's around fostering. So I think a lot of the conversation is around foster care, trying to find placements locally, trying to kind of get more foster carers in-house, so working for local authorities and in the area that they live. I think there's less, really, in terms of what they're going to do about residential provision, how much it costs. The reality at the moment is that, residential's costs are huge in comparison to what they were previously. But I don't know, Sheila, you might be able to answer this better than me.
No, I can just... So I can add, I think you're answering it perfectly, but I think that the part of the whole bit of this review is about children not coming into care and children staying in loving families, and if they do have to come into care, that it's the best quality possible of care, and that's the thing about stable homes built on love. So in terms of residentials, I think that's wrapped up with a view about we need to have larger commissioning arrangements So, for example, in our adoption services, we've gone to alliances. So we're in an Adopt East Alliance, which is quite a lot of the Eastern Region authorities, not all of them, but it's about 8 of them, isn't it? And that gives us more power because we've got more reach, we've got more depth about how we can do recruitment and how we can support adopters. And I think the thinking about that is with residentials, if you have more... so for Thurrock, you know, we're commissioning a smaller number, but if we joined a couple of large counties, as well as maybe a few more unitaries, then we are commissioning a much bigger amount of provision, and it would give us... It would make it easier to hold some of those larger private companies to account, because we would have, say, instead of 20 placements, we'd be talking about 200, because it wouldn't just be us, it'd be others. And I think that is what they're looking at, and we are talking across the Eastern region about that. Some of the difficulties is that we are actually in competition with each other, because there's hardly any placements out there at the minute. So you know, if we pool placements, there are usually more children needing those placements than there are placements. So that's the dilemma at the moment, is I think the principles and the philosophy behind doing that is absolutely right. But actually, if we are desperate for a placement and so are 3 other of the local authorities in the same pool and there's one placement, you know, how do you then choose? And we might have found that placement. So if we think we've found that placement, we'll be like, oh, we need that. So we're grappling with that in the Eastern region, because we do know that together, you know, we are bigger and stronger. And we've done that on recruitment. So there's an Eastern region microsite for social work. And although we are all in competition with each other for social workers, we have joined together as an Eastern region. We've got a microsite. And there was a lot of anxiety about that to start off with, because we thought, oh, you know, we've got a microsite and it's advertising all the jobs. Someone who might have just come to Thurrock might look at that and go, oh, right, they're paying a bit more over there, or they've got a different thing. But it hasn't worked like that. It's been quite good and very collegiate. So I think across the Eastern region we are more than happy to get together and try and work together on the issue in residential. I think it's better at fostering end, but it's the residential end that is the most expensive, but also not necessarily providing the best care for children. So you could kind of swallow paying a lot of money if you thought that child is going to get amazing outcomes at the end of it, and it really transform their life and change their life, but quite often it doesn't. So that's why we're really keen to do whatever we can, you know, to get better provision and for it to be more efficient.
So I think, as Sheila said, a lot of these reforms are around keeping children within families. You know, so can children stay within the family network? You know, can those people be foster carers? Can we kind of support them in the same way we would support foster carers? And we do that wherever we can. We're always looking at family members to see whether or not they can provide an alternative. Because we know that as children get older, they often want to be with their families. So if it's at all possible, that's what we want for them. And so in some ways that doesn't really feed into the residential question, I think, because there's a big focus on families and families being part of the solution.
Thank you. And just to acknowledge that Lizzie is here now, would you want me to hand over at the end of the item, or...?
Yes, if you finish the agenda item, I'll take over.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, my concern about this, I was reading the Association of Directors of Children's Services report, and in it, obviously, there's a funding issue. So the independent review and the reform says that these changes should pay for themselves, because obviously if you've got more children that are being looked after in the family, that's much less expensive than having children on on protection plans or children in the care of the local authority. So although I absolutely welcome the emphasis on children being kept in families, I mean, nobody wants to take children away from their families if at all possible. I'm sure we all agree on that. And I'm sure it will give us all savings down the road, but it's down the road. And at the moment, the independent review said it's going to cost 2.6 billion to actually fund these reforms properly to deliver the outcomes that we want to see. But at the moment, we've only got 200 million allocated, and whether there's going to be any funding after 2 years is unclear at the moment. So added to that, my concerns are about our own financial position, obviously at Thurrock, which has already prevented us from applying for Pathfinder funding, where basically you get a doubled up service, as I understand it. You know, you'd be able to run two services along side by side, and we're going to be having to make some very tough decisions about what services we fund, and at the end of the day, the services that we're supposed to be focusing on in this reform are the non-statutory ones. So we can't cut the statutory services, but we've got to cut 75 million off a current budget of 150 million. So I suppose my question is, what are the risks? I mean, I think we're ahead of the game because we've already got a strengths-based approach, and we've already done work on keeping children with their families wherever possible, and I know that you're all very dedicated to those principles. But will we even have a non-statutory service in 5 years' time?
I mean, I think everyone's aware of the position that we're in as a council. What I can say is that children's services have been very well supported within that difficult context, and, you know, I think all party support for children's services and what we need to deliver, and I think everyone understands the importance of and the principles behind early help, because if you don't have early help, it just escalates children and their situations into the statutory service. So certainly the savings that we're looking at right now are not about touching our early help, and nor have we made any reductions in our social work and our frontline provision. And I think we were just talking earlier about spans of control and caseloads, you know, and as far as we are concerned, and I know we have support certainly within the council, within cabinet and with shadow cabinet, I'm pretty sure, is that, you know, we're not going to compromise on that. So for next year, that's not what's in the plan, but you're quite right, there's another 18 million the year after and a 30 million year after, and I think there'll be difficult questions for the whole council across all the services about how do we manage that. You know, what I would certainly say is, you know, early help is about prevention and preventing high costs further down the line, but it has to wash its face. So if we're going to have that amount of early help, we have to see the reductions in looked after children, because we do spend an absolute fortune, and children's and adult services I think are probably the 2/3 spend for the whole council. So where we have to look to is what can we do to reduce demand on the statutory end. Reducing your early help is not going to reduce demand on your high end, but then we have to show that in reality. So, and as you say, sometimes it takes a year, 18 months to get that shift and to make that change, and that's why it is a shame we couldn't go for Pathfinders, because Pathfinders get, you know, 2 or 3 million to set up a service that's additional to while you're changing, but. You know, I mean, I can't sit here and say, you know, nothing's going to happen, because obviously we have got to make savings and reductions, but I can say for the next year that's not where the council's going, and I feel as the DCS in good faith that I've got good support from members as well as from, you know, more senior officers and from other directorates, because it just means other directorates have to take more of the spend. So I can't sit here and say it won't ever happen, but actually I think there's a lot of commitment and understanding to that early help is the way that you will drive down demand for the more expensive costs that come with not just costs, but for children as well. If we can keep children with their families safely, then that's where we want to be, definitely.
Thank you, Sheila. I mean, hopefully the government will respond to some of the responses from organisations that have raised this issue. There should be cost savings, but that's down the road, and that there will need to be considerable support to actually establish the reforms. But yes, very welcome the reforms. I think I don't know what other members think, but I think it is headed in the right direction. Obviously, whenever we can, we'd want to keep children with their families.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report and answers. I think it's very positive to note the government's increase in funding for care leavers allowance from 2,000 to 3,000, and then apprenticeship bursary increase from 1,000 to 3,000, which is very positive. We recently set up these family hubs. So what was the response from users and families on these family hubs?
So we've had some really positive feedback from families in terms of the family hubs, and we're involved in the community in that. So we've got a community group, and there's lots of things being led by the community, and it means that families can go and receive services not just from children's social care, but from midwives and health visitors and other professionals in one place. So far, the feedback's been really good. It's still in development, but we've recently had the launch. People are welcome to go along and visit the hubs and see what we're doing. But so far, the feedback has been really, really positive.
Yeah, thank you. Just another question. On these 3.9, you did mention earlier, we did submit our bid as part of Eastern Region. So just a clarification. So is that an individual bid, or is it part of Eastern Region overall?
So it's part of the region, so it's a bid across the region.
Thank you. And just to say, there was a very good turnout, I thought, for the family hubs relaunches or launches. Lots of children having fun, and a really good fun day with various people in different costumes. It was a good day. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. Can I just ask, you mentioned about trying to keep the number of looked after children down. I see we've got quite a lot of unasylum seekers at the moment. Do you get additional government funding for that to compensate for the increase?
We do get some funding for unaccompanied asylum seekers, but it doesn't really cover all the costs in terms of staffing and a range of other things, really. But we do get funding for unaccompanied asylum seekers, yes.
So it's so when the number's gone over, you don't get compensated for that, really, then?
So we're part of a national referral mechanism. So if we go over our numbers, then we would then transfer them. At the moment, we're transferring within the region, but there's a national transfer referral scheme, so we can transfer any young people that are over our numbers. If they come in post 17 and a half, then we're obliged to keep them within our service. That then has an impact on our care leaving service, because a lot of the unaccompanied asylum seekers that come in are over 16, so that does have an impact on our care leavers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. So the recommendations are that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the contents of the government's implementation strategy for reforms to children's social care and the potential impact these will have on service delivery over the next few years, and the Overview and Scrutiny note actions taken thus far in implementing the government's strategy.
Are we agreed? Yeah, no, agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand the chair back to Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Councillor Maldoni, and thank you for taking the helm, and apologies to everyone for being late. We'll now move to item 8, which is Children's Transport Contract Procurement 2024. May I ask Sarah Williams to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this report is for the contracts that were extended, agreed by Cabinet. So they were extended by 1 year, agreed by Cabinet in March. So the extension was for the period of September this year until July 2024. As we know, homeschool transport is a statutory duty on the local authority. We're looking to do a full re-procurement for the next academic year, so that will be from September 2024. Our contracts are currently under a 4-year fixed framework agreement. As we've extended those, we have had the time now to look at options for next year. The framework is used to procure transport operators. It's done as individual routes, and once that procurement is completed, that's then closed, and it doesn't allow any new operators to join in that 4-year period. So once they're effectively on the framework, that then becomes closed, which is difficult for us. Means that no new operators that may move into the borough or want to join that contract can. We currently, at the time of writing the report, actually, we had 180 routes covering primary, secondary, and special schools transport, with around 1,000, just over 1,000 pupils being transported every day, both locally in Thurrock and outside of Thurrock to out of borough schools. Members, should be aware that this is always subject to change. It's a demand-led service. So, as the demand comes in, that can quite often change, and the numbers of pupils can go up and the numbers of routes, but we try as much as possible to contain that and manage that and monitor that on a monthly basis. Our current contract value is approximately 6.1 million per year. And again, that changes depending on demand. We have got a 7% increase per annum, and that's based on previous forecasts and increases in children with EHC plans, education and healthcare plans. So potentially, with a 5% increase on the annual contract value, that would increase our costs by 620 million. Each year, so we're building in, an increase on an annual basis. We cover 620k. Sorry, did I say million?
I think we're all sitting there going
620,000. Sorry, I've got millions on my brain. That's because we spend so much. So 620 million. Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, we'll save that straight away.
Yeah. So we're covering different areas of transport. So as I've said, we've got mainstream schools, special schools, which includes resource spaces, children's social care provision, so we have a contract for that. And we continue to review our transport. So we look at it on a monthly basis. We look at where we can achieve best value. We look at routes where we can reduce them if possible. We look at whether we can transport children going to different schools, so they might be going to primary, secondary, within the routes that were already existing, particularly where we've got new children that become eligible into the borough. We will be looking at the homeschool transport policy, because there was new statutory guidance that was published in June this year. So that means that we now are undertaking a review of the policy. And there'll be full engagement with our stakeholders. There'll be further reports to come to Children's Overview and Scrutiny and further to Cabinet for any changes that we make. So we're in the process of looking at that at the moment. As I've said, we constantly review our budgets. We undertake our forecasting expenditure on a monthly basis so that we can keep within the budget envelope that we have. As part of this work for looking at the new re-procurement, we have undertaken market engagement with our operators. In fact, we meet with them now on a termly basis so that we can have that two-way interaction with them. But and we've been working really closely with our procurement team on this re-procurement. So we have undertaken some market engagement with them. We've also looked at what other authorities do. So there's quite a number of authorities that still use a framework, and there's quite a number that use what we call a dynamic purchasing system. So we've done some work there. We've looked at a number of options. We've got there are 4 options. Our fourth option really, and I won't talk through them all unless you particularly want me to, is where we look at working with Essex, collaborate with them. They've got a dynamic purchasing system that's already in place. In fact, they've just undertaken a new procurement exercise for their DPS system. And that would allow us to add new operators. So we would use our existing operators. They would undertake the onboarding for us. Lots of our operators that work within Thurrock also work for Essex, so they do transport for Essex. So it kind of made sense to look at that as an option, to look at collaborating with them. And so by doing that, that reduces a lot of the duplication with resources from our end, because that onboarding process would be done, and then we would be looking at awarding the contracts by Thurrock, so they wouldn't be awarded by Essex. So we would award our own contracts under that dynamic purchasing framework agreement. I think other than that, that's probably as much information, so unless you have any questions now.
Thank you for the report. Oh, I didn't turn it on. Sorry, thank you. Has that got sort of universal support at the moment, or is it still sort of being debated at the moment?
No, that's support. When you say universal, do you mean with Essex?
Yes, is everyone within Essex and within the team here all sort of supporting that?
Yes.
Are there any questions? Councillor Muldoon.
Thank you, Chair. So from your explanation and sort of my understanding, the key driver here is cost, but there's also an element that's about flexibility. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So looking at the options, obviously it isn't an option to do nothing because we've got a statutory duty to provide home-to-school transport. There isn't an option to deliver in-house because we haven't got the money. Just wanted to clarify option 3, contract for the service via a council-owned framework agreement, which is what we've got already, or dynamic purchasing system. I wonder if those should have been 2 options, actually, rather than... I mean, there's no point having option 2 in there because it's just not possible. Because those are different things. So we know the cost of our current framework agreement system. What cost savings are we hoping to make moving over to the DPS system? Obviously, we've got the flexibility element. And what will the costs be for collaborating with Essex County Council and them doing the onboarding element?
I think in terms of cost savings, for us it's not, we're not going to generate, because it's a demand-led service, so it's difficult to make savings from moving to a DPS. What it does do is give us, as you say, the flexibility. It also gives us greater opportunity for more operators to join. So, instead of just having the operators that we've got at the moment that we then put routes out to, actually there's more competition. So there's many more operators on that contract, on that dynamic purchasing system. So there's more choice for Thurrock and for Essex, because actually they will be able to look at, to use our operators too. Sorry, what was the second part of your question? Cost for the system.
What will be the cost for Essex County Council doing the onboarding?
We were advised that there would be no cost. However, I think that there's still a conversation taking place between Essex and procurement, so both procurement teams at Thurrock and Essex, in terms of whether there's any contribution from Thurrock towards the licence that Essex already pays for. So at this stage, I don't have any costs. We're not aware of any costs that we will have to be contributing to that.
Sorry, can I answer? And leading on from that, what is the fallback if it doesn't work? So obviously we've got a system at the moment which seems to work. I mean, I don't get any complaints about children not having their transport for whatever reasons. So the system that we've got in the moment does work. And obviously we've got SEND children that may have very specific requirements. So I'm just a little bit, I just want to sort of challenge a bit on, yes, I can understand why you would want greater flexibility to bring on new contractors, and maybe the competition will help to drive down price. I'm not. You say that isn't really the element that you're looking at. It's more about widening the pool that you've got. But what if we are let down by a company? What is the fallback? Because kids still have to get to school.
They still have to get to school, and the difference between the framework is, as I've said, it's closed. So if we were to go down that option of a 4-year framework, that's then closed to the same operators. If, for example, some of those operators unfortunately went out of business, that reduces your pool that you've got to deliver transport. And given that we've got a statutory duty, we have had some operators unfortunately close business in this last 12 months. So they've had to hand back routes, which has meant we've had to re-tender them, quite often at a significantly higher price. So having the DPS, there'll be a contract in place. There'll be specifications, so there will be a specification for awarding contracts for us, and it gives us, as I said, a greater pool of operators that can come on board at any time. So it's not closed in 4 years. For the 4 years of the life cycle of the DPS, you could have new operators joining every week if there was new ones, and they would go through an onboarding and a compliance check-in process before they were able to work on school contracts, plus all of their licensing. So we work closely with our licensing team here.
So all the standards that we set with our framework contracts, that's not going to go. No. That will still be in place, but it will extend the pool. I can see why it's a persuasive option, but my concern is that I think you really need to nail down, are Essex County Council what are they going to charge us? And that has to be measured against, and really nail down that we still have control in that system and how that works. Because at least we have a workable system at the moment. It's like, I can see why you may want to move, but my worries are that there are still details that would need to be nailed down, and if we can minute, because I think this is going to Cabinet for decision, if we can minute those concerns, I'd be grateful if that can be taken to Cabinet to aid them in making their decision.
I would say, just to add as well, that the close working with our procurement team, they're closely working with the Essex procurement team, our legal team, so we will make sure that the standards that we already have with our framework will be no different if we were moving to a dynamic purchasing system, and to continue and allow that collaboration, but with the standards that we've got already in place.
Okay.
May I ask, are there any other councils that are considering joining this alongside Thurrock?
In joining with Essex, not that I'm aware of at the moment.
My concerns are almost same. If we are not making any savings, we are spending same amount of money, and if the Essex County Council will ask us, these licensing costs are not small costs, so they are very high costs, So if, for instance, we don't want to end up paying more for less services, so if we have already a mechanism in place, we are spending money without licensing or anything, and if we will join them, then obviously, at one point they will ask for this licensing fee. They're not going to give us free those services. So how can we get assurance like we wouldn't be cutting corners, or we are not kind of spending extra money with the same services, same level of services?
Those conversations are being had at the moment with the procurement team and their procurement team to look at what those costs might be before we entered, before there was a cabinet decision or, we sort of entered into any of those contracts, because obviously, we would be paying for that from our budget, which we're trying hard to contain. So we wouldn't want any, expensive spend against the homeschool transport budget for that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and sort of like on, I'd like to see once those discussions have nailed down those costs, a real comparison between what we're spending at the moment and what we would be spending if we went into collaboration. Because personally, I find it extremely unlikely that Essex County Council aren't going to charge us anything for the onboarding. Well, I mean, they're doing quite well out of us at the minute, I suppose, one way or another, but so maybe they will. But, I mean, if they are going to do it for free, we've got quite a few other things we'd like their help with. But, yeah, so what I would like to see, if I was in Cabinet, is a comparison of what the costs are at the moment and what the costs would be of the preferred option once all of those details are nailed down through the procurement teams. Because I agree with Councillor Abbas, we need to make sure that we're not replacing a system which has its issues, but definitely does work at the moment, with a system that is going to destabilise the service that we're running at the moment. Thank you.
What sort of timeline are we looking at to making the decisions? And when will you know the sort of costing amounts, etc.?
So the report is going to Cabinet in December. So we would want to know what those costings are before Cabinet were, before the report was presented to Cabinet for decision. So it's something that we have raised. I have raised the costs a number of times, because it's a risk, that we have to, sort of manage within our directorate, because of the cost implications. So it is something that, is very much on our radar and, is being raised and is being left with procurement to have that discussion to continue that.
Thank you. Councillor Abbas.
Just another clarification. You don't have to answer it because this is obviously, the Essex County Council is a bigger, authority than us. So what number of operators do they have in their system currently compared to us? Or can we get this answer? I know it's not something. If you can get this answer, would be thank you.
I do know they use some of our operators as well as their own. I don't know how many they have on board, which is why, looking at their dynamic purchasing system, because we're thinking about, the operators as well. If we were to go down our own system, there's quite a lot of training for them to learn something new, whereas, collaborating with Essex would be far easier for them to transition, for the operators to transition to a DPS, system from a framework, because they're already registered, they're already onboarded, if you like, into their system. It would just be some of our operators here that would be new to them, but training would be given to them.
Are there any further questions, Councillor?
Yeah, I suppose the other question, and actually Nicola and I had a discussion about this, and this was a question that Nicola raised, so I don't, maybe you want to pose it yourself, but what would be the impact on our local operators? We're not going to put people out of business
we definitely wouldn't want to do that. So, we have talked to our operators. They do know. We've been really, we communicated with them all the way through, and we, in fact, met with them just a few weeks ago and talked about that's an option that we are looking at. So we don't, we absolutely do not want to put them out of business. They will be able to do the onboarding. They will have the training to go onto that system. Should we go down that route? Should that be the decision? And they would apply for contracts as they do now, which will be managed by us. So they would, we want to maintain the control of our mini competitions and our tenders that go out. So we will absolutely, support them as much as we can with their onboarding into a new system, should it go that way, and to support them with their, for their contracts.
Can I just ask a sort of more operational question about, I appreciate if you don't know the answer to this, but how does it work? Do people bid and they give a price that they can deliver that contract for? So presumably there is a hope that with greater competition that will drive down the price.
It is a hope. If you've got more competition, that that those prices could come down. Home to school transport is, as we all know, is hugely expensive. But we do look at, other than operators, our contracted vehicles, we do look at other types of transports such as fuel reimbursements, bus and train tickets. So we do look at public transport as well. So this is really just for our operators, and they do bid. So if there's a new route that has to be tendered, because we don't already have a route going to a particular school, generally that's out of the borough now, because most of our routes have kind of settled down now. We're into the academic year. That route would be tendered, and then operators could then bid, and it's all done through our Oracle system. And actually, it's not done within our team.
And how would we keep the quality? Because obviously I don't know the actual profile, but I imagine that there are some of our children that maybe need the same driver, or that's going to be very difficult for them to manage, and the same person coming at the same time every day. How do we make sure that we're keeping that quality of service that we've already got from pre-existing sort of arrangements, and knowing our market very well in this wider market?
Yeah, it would be difficult if you've got new operators coming on board, because if you've got your operators that you've got at the moment, families are used to the operator that they've got, but sometimes families have to reapply every year. But sometimes they don't always get the driver or the operator that they had last year. What we have done, because we've extended the route, so we've extended the contract, so all the routes that were existing at the end of last academic year have continued. So those routes have been agreed, so they've effectively kept the same drivers and peers. But of course drivers leave, passenger assistants leave, and so they have new drivers. So they, and they do have meetings with families, so they do have intro meetings. And sometimes transport doesn't work out for some children. There might be certain issues with it, that a family and a particular driver. So, or the behaviour sometimes means that we might need to move them to a different route, just to change, to try and sort of alleviate some of the stress that's causing for them, and just to make it easier. So sometimes we move children around routes, so that, but generally we try to keep them with the same drivers, same PAs. But of course they do change sometimes.
Sorry, just finally, if I can say, can I make a suggestion about the options? That maybe option 2, because there's no point having that option in there because it's just not possible. Maybe option 2 could be that the service carries on as it is now with the framework agreements, and option 3 would be procuring our own dynamic purchasing service. I just think that makes more sense in terms of options. I mean, it's obviously up to you what you present to Cabinet, but I just think that would make more sense. And yeah, presumably the time and the resources needed to do it by ourselves are going to be considerably more than going with Essex. I can see that point. Okay, thank you.
That's fab.
Sorry, we have been asking a lot of questions. Thank you, for all these answers. Just a quick one. Obviously our preference is our children, going to these schools. But obviously these current operators, they have been working with us, maybe for a long time. And I understand some of them, they are local businesses, So obviously you have done this consultation with them. So are we taking their views on board while making this final decision?
Yes, we are taking their views on board, and which is why we meet with them on a termly basis, so that we can talk to them and we can understand from them, what are the challenges with dynamic purchasing system, if there is any, what's good about if they currently are with Essex. For some of them that are already with Essex, it's a benefit to them because it's something that they're already used to. They understand how it works. And we've said that we will support them all the way through. We want all of the operators to be able to continue to deliver transport to Thurrock children and work on Thurrock school contracts.
Are there any further questions from members? No, or from Karen?
Thank you. I've probably got two questions. If our framework works, why can't we just tweak it so we can have a wider circle of operators? And secondly, are we not having a cost saving by where we're reducing the effort and the resource and the time to if we do outsource it to Essex? I know that's two separate questions there, but that was just two things I noted.
That's right, I'll take your first one. Once you've done it, so if we were to do a new 4-year framework, whichever operators are awarded at that time, that's it. You can't join any new ones for 4 years. So that means...
Why?
Because that's the way the contract is. That's how the framework is set up.
That's my question.
That's a question for it's set. I know that you definitely can't change it. So it's a 4-year. It's fixed. That's the difference between a framework and something like a dynamic purchasing system. Not something that you can change. It's procurement rules. So unfortunately, otherwise, it would be easy to just do that. We wouldn't be looking at anything else. And then your next question
about the cost saving
was about the cost saving.
So in-house we'd reduce. If we haven't got somebody doing all this extra additional work, surely we would have some cost saving of the staff.
With the onboarding would be done by procurement, and it might be something that we would have to take back over. But all of the contracts, so all of the awarding and the tendering, is done by our team. So that all those tenders go out, so it would be no different. Yeah, it would still. We would still. I'm not selling it to you.
Sorry.
We would still have the same amount of work. In fact, we'd probably have more.
I just kind of think I'm a bit of an old-fashioned. If it's not broken, don't fix it, and just maybe tweak it.
And I understand that. And I think if it was a framework where we could, because I suppose if you see it from a new operator's point of view, it's unfair to them because they might have moved into this area of business, but they can't actually join any of our contracts for 4 whole years if we've just done a new procurement. So for them, I have to see for both sides, sides. For current operators, any new operators sort of moving into this market, we want to try and make it as fair for everybody.
But certainly picking up what Sarah says, I live pretty much on top of treetops. I live in the Woodside estate, so I get Woodside and treetops traffic. So I know school transport, and quite often there is a gridlock where a child, especially from treetops, an autistic child, if he's not got in the right side of the van, the traffic doesn't move because this child will. We had one last week where he just run around, and we had to shut down the entire area for his safety. So we could try and then, the staff for treetops, try to then coach him back into the van, get the other children out, so he got the seat that he normally gets.
Yes.
So it certainly is a big thing for
it's very complex.
Our special children.
It's very complex, actually. Just the whole operational and organisation of it all, but also, for the children that have got special needs and the different complexities that they all have, does make it really challenging. But schools do an amazing job. I have to say, the schools do an amazing job working with the young people.
But it happens so regularly. And even I think when you change the entrance you're going to make to treetops, that's going to be a big change for some of these children. They need everything as it is, and it's heartbreaking, but that's the way it is. So yeah, it was a big point that Sarah made.
Moving on from your point about the same people for the same children, there will obviously be new children coming in as well, so they do need to be factored in. So if we've still got our existing transporters, you know, we'll have new ones and then there'll be new children, so it might be possible to keep the existing support for the children that need the same person in this framework, do you think?
We do, but it depends, obviously, when we then go to re-procurement, which we have to do because we've already had a one-year extension. When we go to re-tender the contracts, it depends whether that same operator wins that contract, wins that route. We can't guarantee that because actually that's how the process has to be. It has to be where, you know, it's fair and transparent, and, you know, the same operator may not win that bid next time.
Do they discuss it?
I'm going to say that what they talk about outside is we're not privy to, but, you know, they should keep it confidential. But I couldn't confirm or deny whether they consult with each other outside. They're all in the same line of business, so I don't know, is the honest answer.
But that would be the case with whatever option is chosen, the procurement and the transporters. So that sort of is going to be the same for whichever option we choose. So, I mean, my opinion would be to sort of find out the costing for option 4, and if it is going to be competitive, then I would be supporting that option. So the recommendation there might need to be a slight tweaking. So we've got Children's Overview and Scrutiny recommend, Cabinet agree the recommendation for the Council to collaborate with Essex County Council on a procurement exercise for a dynamic purchasing system. Might have to be sort of further to costing analysis or just inserted or something, if that's possible.
If you would like to propose that amendment to the recommendation, somebody would need to second it.
Yeah.
So does anybody second?
Yeah.
Councillor Abbas does. Okay. Thank you.
So that would just be an insert after the DPS in brackets, and after that, and to undertake further competition via the DPS to award contracts for children's homeschool transport as set out in section 3. Is members in agreement?
Can you just read out the amended
from the beginning? Okay,
how you want
right,
it, and then I
fine.
can make a clear note of it.
So, Children's Overview and Scrutiny recommend Cabinet agree the recommendation for the Council to collaborate with Essex County Council brackets (ECC) brackets on a procurement exercise for a dynamic purchasing system brackets DPS bracket, further to costing analysis, and to undertake further competition via the DPS to award contracts for children's homeschool transport as set out in section 3. Members in agreement?
Yeah. It is, it's very, very difficult because we have raised our concerns, so we obviously taking into account these concerns. Yeah,
so that's why it's saying
subject.
further subject to the costing analysis and outcomes.
Yeah. I don't know if I would recommend it without hearing the further details.
It would be on a par with what we're paying at the moment. That's what the analysis would. That's what we're set out to achieve, isn't it? We don't want to be spending any more money than we are at the moment. That's the.
Can I say I think there's I think there are risks with going. I mean, obviously we need to nail down what the charging is going to be from Essex County Council. I think that's one element, and I wouldn't really want to recommend that option until I had that data personally. But also I think there are other risks in terms of moving to a dynamic purchasing system, in terms of having lots of new operators competing for contracts and maybe change, a lot of change happening and the ability to be able to manage that amount of change. So I think there are risks apart from the financial risk that we need to nail down about Essex County Council. So personally I wouldn't want to recommend option 4 until I'd satisfied myself that those are not going to be significant risks financially and in terms of the service that's provided to children.
I think the way the procurement works, though, is that we're not going to eliminate the risk of outside contractors because it's going to depend on how the tenders go. So the main thing we can sort of amend from here is really going to be the costing, because the option is the option as it's laid out. We can't really alter it as an option, but we need to set down the costings of it. But the way it's going to work with procurement and outside providers is probably something that we won't have that much control on. Am I correct in that as the way the option works?
No, we will have control in terms of putting the competitions out through that DPS. If that's the option that's agreed, if option 4 is agreed, then we will retain it. But what we won't be able to do, is stop new operators joining that dynamic purchasing system. It will be open and transparent and fair to everybody. Current operators here, we could have operators from Essex that are on that dynamic purchasing system, that apply for routes that we put out. I think for us, we have to consider that we have lost operators that have gone out of business when you've got the cost of living crisis. If we were to lose, the risk that I'm concerned about is if we lost lots of operators, how would we deliver our statutory duty and how would we deliver home to school transport for all of those children that are eligible if we don't have enough operators? That's where I am sort of considering, that where that option would be of a benefit to Thurrock to have more operators, all of the ones that we've got now, and more be able to join if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that's also a risk, so I completely take on board that point. I'm just wondering how we could reword the amendment to...
I think sort of
thing, to my understanding, this is obviously is complicated, but at the same time is a simple process where we have to choose. We will have more operators in our pool, but ultimately it would be us, our officers and portfolio holder who will be awarding these contracts. Am I right? Yeah. So ultimately the power will stay within our authority. The only positive thing we have is we will have a wider pool of operators rather than the smaller pool. Yeah. Yes. So I think then the only concerns is the costing. We don't want to end up paying more for the almost same services. I also agree with the councillors. The reason is if we don't know what the costs are, so it would be kind of slightly difficult to recommend something, which we don't know what the cost implication would be, So it means if we are giving a kind of blank check in a way, like, whatever, or there potentially it could be if there is a conflict between us, not conflict, consensus, then what we can do is officers can go back and they can check potentially if there are any costs associated with this, and I'm sure there would be something, and then get back to us, and then we can do electronic vote or by email.
So, I mean, I think if we add in, as we've said, about the
Costing.
consideration into the recommendation, are members in agreement with those, or shall we take?
Shall we add up this?
Members don't have to all agree. Obviously, it would go to
Yeah,
vote.
yeah,
So if
yeah.
somebody didn't want to agree, I would record that in the minutes. But
Yeah.
if you want to reword the recommendation that you've just said, and somebody seconds it, we can do that, or you can stick with the rewording that you just done, and we would have a vote, and people don't have to vote for that.
Okay.
Or
so-
shall we say subject to no extra cost?
I think subject to comparative.
Yeah,
costing.
comparative cost.
You're
Yeah.
not going to get it exactly the same, but costing.
Yeah.
So, would you like me to read it out then? Okay. So, recommendation 1.1. Children's Overview and Scrutiny recommend Cabinet agree the recommendation for the Council to collaborate with Essex County Council (ECC) on a procurement exercise for a dynamic purchasing system (DPS) subject to comparative costings with current system, and to undertake further competition via the DPS to award contracts for children's home to school transport as set out in section 3. And then you want a second?
Yeah, I can second this. Yeah.
And then if they agree or not.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm not happy to agree
Okay.
that particular phrasing of it. I think we should recommend the Cabinet, look at more detail. As I don't think we're going to be able to look at it. We won't be able to look at it again if it's going to Cabinet in December. We won't be able to look at it again. We haven't got a meeting till January. I mean, I'd be happier with a recommendation that sort of noted our concerns that we've raised tonight, and recommended that further detail should be presented to Cabinet on the options, and maybe the change in options. So changing option 2 to the.
To me, I think the
system that we
concerns
have
will
now
automatically will be added because those are parts of the minutes.
I'm not sure that concerns go into recommendations.
I have noted what you've said on those things, and I'll ensure they're in the minutes, which will obviously be presented to Cabinet with the report.
We haven't got, sorry, just to interrupt, we haven't got, is there capacity to bring it back or not? Or are we running out of time?
Yeah,
December, I
time-
know, but can they
yeah.
postpone the decision or not? Is it pushing it too late then?
I mean, that would be up to you, Chair, I
Depends
suppose.
on, you need to make a decision in December, don't you, on the procurement, because it's already gone over, hasn't it? So it does have to be brought back. The only way would be if you, I suppose, were to have an extraordinary meeting, but I'm not sure. That would be the only option, I would think.
We're the only ones that are collaborating with Essex, and I think in terms of the costings, I just wanted to clarify that we don't currently pay for a framework, so we don't pay for a system. So any costs that you're concerned about would be probably around licence fee. So it's the Thurrock contribution, if there is one. You know, I'd like to think that there isn't, but you know, as we know, nothing's ever for free. It's that element. It's really for you to understand, and for us actually, as a directorate, to understand what the cost element is, as the Thurrock contribution towards their system for doing the onboarding. So, you know, whether there will be a charge because they're onboarding anyway, all operators. We're managing our own contracts, if you like. So we're managing that element. We're doing the tendering. I wouldn't expect a huge contribution, but what I can't give you tonight is what that contribution is, because those conversations are being had between both of the procurement teams at either council. So unless there was a way that we could provide that information back to you outside of this meeting, but before Cabinet for an agreement on the recommendations. I don't know whether that's an option or not before the report is presented to Cabinet in December.
So Cabinet will meet, mid-December?
It's the 13th of December.
13th. So that would mean an extraordinary meeting before that date.
On this note, I think we also have to be mindful, to be honest, because the issue is our procurement team and legal teams. They are in discussion with the Essex County Council, and they are also aware of our potential saving targets, and also on our spendings in terms of Section 114 notice, So I'm not sure if they will be going kind of something, or they would be accepting something which is cost-wise very, very high compared to whatever we are currently spending. So obviously they are very, very mindful of, what we can spend and what our budgets are, But at the same time, it would, if it would have been more clarity on these licensing fee and those things, and the issue is, personally, to my knowledge, it could be wrong, these licensing fee, they might change annually, subject to these licensing costs, because the recruitment process is ongoing. So it would be very, very difficult if they will give us a figure, say, for instance, some X amount, for this year. So it would be very, very difficult to say, look, this will be the same cost for coming years or months, So this is something, obviously, our legal and procurement team are aware of. So they will make sure.
I would imagine that we know the costings for the 4 year. Once we find out, we would know what it would cost for the next 4 years. So we're not going to get a different costing each year, are we? It's going to be.
I would hope not. No, I would hope that,
Decision on extraordinary.
Yeah, well, I wasn't clear on the vote. If you're sticking with the recommendation,
I think it's 3-3.
as long as you don't.
3 in agreement and
3 dissenting, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's with the amended wording, subject to comparative costing with current system. That's the amended wording, yeah. Yep. Okay, you can move on to the next one if you're happy.
So, recommendation 1.2, Children's Overview and Scrutiny recommend Cabinet agree that the Director of Children's Services is given delegated authority to award contracts following further competitions under the DPS.
agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Right, so item 9 is the work programme. Do members have anything they would like to add to the work programme?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did mention it earlier, but I'll just say it again under this item because the Chair wasn't there at that point, but I did ask for the RAC item to come back and for there to be a briefing note in the interim. But the next meeting's January, isn't it? So let's have that come back with a proper report in January. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or suggestions from members or from representatives? Councillor Muldowney.
Yeah, just actually looking at the agenda, it's quite packed in January. I'm just wondering, as it's the second to last meeting of the year, is there really, what is the benefit of having the overview of responsibilities of the portfolio holder for children's services at that late point?
I have no idea. Technically, I think the leader sets out what
I mean, it's your
responsibilities are. Yes,
it's
I think it's a typo because I saw it earlier and it was the same last year. Is they gave an overview and then it was meant to be the cabinet member reporting to scrutiny of their role because I don't see that anywhere else on the work programme. I might be mistaken, but I think it's just that's been left on when it should have been the other one left on from last year. I could be wrong, but that's how I saw it.
something else. Yeah.
I'm happy if there's scope in the agenda for that to happen. Sorry.
Yeah, I assume that was the portfolio holders' report to ONS. Yeah.
So last year, Councillor Johnson gave an update of the overview of the role. It was requested by someone, and then he had a portfolio holder report a month later. So I think that's just one's been left on and one hasn't. Just a mistake.
So does that mean we've got one item that's going to be the report from Children's Services and another item that's going to be coming in March, that's the report from the portfolio holder for education? I mean, obviously, we know that these reports have been taken out of full council, which is a mistake, I think. But anyway, you know, because we've got quite empty agendas in full council and packed agendas in scrutiny. So, and it's going to be even worse when we go to the 3 scrutiny committee. You know, I don't know how that work planning is going to happen, to be honest.
Just say in the March items there are 2 updates from working groups, but I'm not sure if those working groups are actually going ahead because I've not heard
I think they've been
anything
cancelled.
on
I
them.
don't think there's been much
No,
progress.
I haven't heard anything
I'd be
on them.
surprised
So
if
I
we
would
get
think
an
that
update.
those 2 items in March will be off the agenda. That leaves quite a lot of room for March.
Can we add
At the moment, there looks like there's space. So
Right, yeah.
it should be fine. Yeah.
Oh, just to say that I thought that the items raised by the Thurrock Local Safeguarding Partnership Board were going to bi-monthly, that standing item. Didn't we discuss that at the last meeting? So we need to keep it in for January, but so what could we potentially move from January to March in that case?
I'm pretty sure Michelle's reports have to go in January, so I would be reluctant to advise you to move them.
We could move the children obesity report, although that is obviously a very important report. But that could be moved to March potentially.
Could we move the report, Councillor Johnson's report, to March? That would make more sense at the end of the year to hear that report alongside the...
2 portfolio holder reports on the same meeting in March.
Yeah, but there's nothing else on the agenda apart from the Youth Cabinet update. It makes sense to have them both on the same night, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we can do that and then keep the obesity, and that keeps the obesity report in January. Yep. I'm okay with that.
We've got a bit of space maybe then in March to add something else in.
We usually have children's social care performance on every other ONS, so it's not listed for March, so there should be something in March.
We'll in January have an update on the transport as well, won't we? Would that just be as a briefing, perhaps, do you think? Or would that be... Yeah.
I'm happy to note if you want
could
to
do a
as a
briefing.
briefing note.
Yes, thank you. Any further comments? Or requests from anyone? Okay. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I declare the meeting closed at 9:03.